Hey everyone, it's Anthony from Pretty Printer here. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to do authentication and authorization using Flask-Login in Flask, of course. So authentication and authorization are pretty important. Authentication meaning that you validate someone's credentials, meaning they can access parts of your site. And then authorization is actually determining if they can access a part of your site. So the example will be pretty simple, but you'll see how the entire process works with Flask-Login. And by the way, I'm writing an article to go along with this video on scotch.io. So I'll have a link in the description below so you can read the article and get the code if you would like. So to start off, I have some templates already. I didn't want to go through and actually create the templates in the video because it will take a while. But basically I have 5 templates, a base template that has some links, and then it has a block for content. I have an index for the home page, have a login for the login form, profile for something like a profile page, and a sign up form here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create the project around those templates and then show you what's going on. So the first thing I'll do is I'll create a file, dunder init, and in here I'll do the Flask import from Flask, import Flask, and I'll also import Flask SQL Alchemy. So you need to have Flask, Flask SQL Alchemy, and Flask-Login installed in your virtual environment for this tutorial. So make sure you have those 3. And I'll type them here. So pip install Flask SQL Alchemy. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to do it. So Flask SQL Alchemy and Flask-Login. So make sure you do those in addition to having Flask, of course. So Flask SQL Alchemy, and I'll go ahead and import Flask-Login as well. I'm going to import the login manager, which I'll be using later in the video. So I'll instantiate the database for now, even though I won't be using it quite yet. And I'll create the create app function. And this is where I'll instantiate the Flask app. I'll configure a secret key because anytime you're doing anything with like authentication, you'll probably need a secret key, authentication and cookies. So this is my secret key. Do not steal it. Okay, that's obviously not a good secret key, but it just needs to be something. So I'll set the SQL Alchemy database URI as well. And I'll just have this be something called db.sqlite. Okay, SQLite 3. Next thing I'll do is I'll init the database. And I will import some blueprints that I haven't actually created. I'll create them next, but I'm going to create a blueprint called auth, and I'm going to create a module called auth. So from auth, import auth, and I'll call this auth blueprint. Don't really need that part, but just to make it a little more clear, and I'll register that blueprint. So register blueprint, auth blueprint, and I'll do the same thing for another blueprint that I'll create called main. Main blueprint. So the auth blueprint will have the parts for logging in, signing in, and logging out, while the main blueprint will have the index and the profile. So I'll add a little bit more to this file, but for now, let's go ahead and create the blueprint so I can actually see the templates that I've created. So I'll create a new file, and I'll call this one auth.py, and I'll create another one called main.py. So they'll be pretty similar. The main difference is they'll have different routes in them. So from Flask import blueprint, and I'll also be rendering those templates that I have. And then that's it for now. So I'll go ahead and create the blueprint. So blueprint, I'll call this main name, and then I'll create the routes. So main routes. So just slash for the index, and I'll call this index. And I'm going to return the template called index.html. And then I'll create another route called profile. And I'll return the template named profile. So profile.html. So I think that's it for this particular one. And then the auth blueprint is going to be similar, like I said. So I'm going to import blueprints and render template. And then I'm going to create the blueprint. So auth equals blueprints, auth, under name. And then I'll create the routes. So auth routes login. I'm going to return the template login.html. Actually also going to have another route that's also on login, but the difference is, I don't need a colon there, this will handle posts. So I'll separate the get and posts. So posts, and I'll call this login posts, and it's going to be something. So what I'll do for now is I'll comment this out and I'll come back to it. And then auth routes sign up is one that I want as well. So in the sign up route, just like the login, I'm going to return a template. So sign up.html. Let's put the return before. And then I'll have another route that's on the same endpoint. So sign up, methods, posts. So sign up, posts, and then I'll come back to this a little bit later. And then what I'm going to have is a logout route. And let's see, logouts. So this won't do anything yet, but what I'll do is I'll bring in redirect in URL4. And what I want to do is I want to return redirect URL4 and then main index. So go to the main blueprint and find the index function. And the reason why I'm doing that here is because I'm going to be using this link in the template. So I need to have something here. I can't just leave it blank. So I have this, which is basically most of what logout does. When I get to it, I'm going to have a logout function inside of it so the user can actually be logged out. So let's see if this is enough to run the app. So Flask run. And let's see, Flask SQL Alchemy. Did I not install it? Maybe I forgot to install it. So I'll just go ahead and install that really quick and make sure everything looks okay with the templates and the init file. Everything does. I'll go ahead and create a models.py file for now because I'll be using it soon. So let's see. This is almost done installing. Okay, so let's try running the app again. Could not import project.project. Oh, wrong directory. And export Flask app equals project, and also export Flask debug equals 1. So let's try running this again, and everything is running. Okay. So if I go here, I see failed to find Flask application. I feel like I messed something very simple up. Yes, I did. I forgot to return app here in my create app function. So small mistake. Run again. Could not build URL for endpoint index. Okay, so now I just need to go to my template and edit these links. So this is going to be main.index, main.profile, auth.login, auth.signup, and auth.logout. So let's try that again. And we see I have the index here. I have a profile page. I have the login page. I have the sign up page. And then when I go to log out, it simply redirects me back to the index. So now that I have all that, the next thing I can do is I can actually work on my models. So I'll go to models.py. So for my model, I'll only have one, which is a user model. And this will represent a user in my app. So I'll say from my project import DB. So I'm importing DB from this dunder init right here so I can actually use it. Let me close that. Go to models. So I'll create a class called user, and it's going to inherit from db.model, and it's going to have a few columns. So the first is going to be an ID column, which is an integer, and this is obviously the primary key. And then I'll have an email column. Let's make this 100. And the email should be unique. I'll have a password column. And let's make this 100 characters long. And finally, I'll have a name column. So when I go to this profile page, instead of saying Anthony, it will say whatever name that you are. So column, DB string, and the name will be, let's say 1,000, just in case someone has a really long name. So that's what I need for the user model. So I should be able to go ahead and create this on the command line. So I'll go back into my project, start up the Python REPL, and I'm going to import two things from my project. So from .import db and create app. And actually, I think didn't need to cd. So let me go back one directory. So from project import db and create app. And then what I want to do is I want to create the database. So db.create all, and I need to pass in an app. So I'm going to pass in the create app function and call it. And that created my database. So on the left-hand side here, I have the database. Can open up the database explorer, but I don't have anything in it yet. So, I mean, it's not really going to help, but I have the database created with the user. So now that I have the database done, now I want to start thinking about bringing in Flask-Login. So I still won't be able to log them in until I get the forms working, but I can add some of the Flask-Login stuff around this. So from Flask-Login, I'm going to import something called the user mixin. And what the user mixin does is it just adds some attributes to your user class to help Flask-Login actually use your user class. Because without the user mixin, then Flask-Login can't actually read or modify your user class in some sense. That's not exactly true, but this just is needed so Flask-Login can use it. Without it, you'd have to write custom code to get it to work. So I have the user mixin here, and then what I'll do is I'll go back to my dunder init file and I'll initialize Flask-Login. So I'm going to take that login manager that I imported at the beginning, and let's see, login manager, and I can specify a login view. So because I'm using a blueprint, it won't work by default. So the login view is going to be auth.login. So the auth blueprint and the login function. So that way, whenever someone isn't authenticated, they'll be automatically redirected to the login view so they can log in. And then I can init app in the same way that I init app here for the DB. So login manager.init app, just like that. And then another thing I want to do is I want to create the user loader. So the user loader is what Flask-Login uses to actually find the user whose session is currently active. So basically what happens is Flask-Login will create a cookie when the user is logged in, and inside that cookie will be the user ID. So every time the user performs a request on your app, it sends the cookie along with that request. So Flask-Login looks in that cookie, looks for the user ID, and then takes that and then uses this user loader that I'm about to write to actually find the user in your database. And that is how Flask-Login creates the connection between the cookie and your actual data in the database. So that's part of where the user mixin comes in, and the other part is this user loader. So I'll use the login manager. I'll use a decorator, and it's called user loader. And I'm going to create a function. I can just call it load user by convention. And this function is going to take in a user ID. So this is the user ID from the cookie. And I'm simply going to return the user associated with that user ID. So return a user, and I need to import this. So from .models import user. Oh no, I should do it right here. So if I do it up here, I'll get a circular import because user uses DB, but DB hasn't been created. So our models uses DB here, but if I put it up there, it wouldn't have been created, so it would mess up. So here is a decent location for it. It's kind of along the same style as here. So return user.query.get. I'll convert the user ID to an integer if it isn't already an integer, and return the user associated with that user ID. So this code is very simple. It's just, it's not immediately obvious why it's needed, but it's to associate the ID in the cookie with the actual user object. So I have that part, and now I want to focus on getting the forms to work. So I don't have to do much for the main blueprint, but for the auth blueprint, I want to make sure that I can bring in the data that the user types into the form and actually use it to create users or log in users. So the first one I'm going to work on is the sign up one. So I'll go ahead and uncomment this, and let me make sure in my template it points to it doesn't. So let's see, action is going to be sign up, and the method is going to be post. So this is going to post the information that they used to sign up with to my routes here. So first I'll need to import the request object so I can actually read the data. So I'm going to get the email, the name, and the password. So email is going to be requests.form.get email. And then likewise for the name and password, we have name and we have password as well. Okay. And then once we have those three pieces of information, the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the user doesn't already exist in the database, because we're trying to sign up here. And if the user already exists, then we want to tell the user that they should be trying to log in. Maybe they accidentally click sign up instead of login, and they try to log in with their credentials, and they need to be told that they need to go to the correct place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to query for the user using the user table. So I have to actually import it. So from models, import user. And I'll say user, query, filter by, and I'll check the email. So email and get the first result. So basically, if this returns anything, that means a user was found in the database, and the user needs to be told that, hey, they can't sign up because they already have an account. So I'll say if user, I'm going to return redirect URL for, should be lowercase, URL for auth.login. And what I want to do here also is kind of flash a message to tell the user that, they don't want to use sign up, they want to use login. So I'll go to my template here, and I'll just put a little alert section above the top of the form. So if I go to sign up, I stop my server. If I go to sign up, I'll just put like a little alert up here underneath sign up above email. So I'm going to use message flashing for this. So with messages equals get flashed messages and end with. So this will allow me to get any messages that were flashed, and flash messages are basically messages that were sent to the next request. So if I flash a message here, then it gets sent to the next request, which is controlled by me because I'm using a redirect. So I'll say if any messages actually exist, I want to display something. So end if, let me indent that. And I'll just create like a little alert section. So div, it's going to be a notification. So I'm using Bulma, but you can use Bootstrap or design it yourself. So I have a div that has a class notification and is danger, so it can be read. And I'm just going to display the first message because I'm only sending one message. And then I'll say something like go to login page. And let me make sure I have the right link for this. So let's see. URL 4 is what I want. URL 4 auth.login. Okay, so that should be enough for the error message. And then I need to flash that message. So flash. So with flash, like I said, I'm just going to kind of send a message to the next request. So flash, let's say email address already exists. And then if that passes, so basically if a user exists, it will return here and skip the rest of the function. If a user doesn't exist, then it can continue down here with this part. So this is where I'll actually create a new user. So new user equals email equals email, name equals name, and the password is going to be the password hash. So instead of using the password directly, I don't want to do that. I want to hash it first before I put it in the database, so it isn't stored in plain text. So workzerg, which is what Flask is built on top of, has a function called generate password hash, and this will allow me to generate the hash for the password. So generate password hash, and workzerg.security is where it comes from. So I'm going to generate password hash. I'm going to pass in the password, and then it's going to take in a method. So I'll just use SHA-256 for the method, SHA-256. The default will probably be fine as well, but that is how I will add the hash password to the database. And then I can go ahead and add this user to the database. So new user, commit it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the user to auth-login. So I'll just copy this. So the only difference between this return and this return is there will be no flash before the redirect. And actually thinking about it, I want to go to sign up here. So the message appears at the top of the box. So that should be it for sign up. So let's go ahead and test it. So invalid syntax, I feel like I missed something. Did I not save it? New user equals user password. Yeah, it's like it's not saved. So I'll just go ahead and restart the server. Okay, so I'll create a user. I'll use my own email, my name, and I'll supply a password. So sign up. So it looks like my table didn't create properly when I did the whole create all. So I need to make sure that everything is okay. So have DB here. I have the init app here. Have models, that's importing db.model. The database URI is set correctly. Just make sure everything looks good before I try. So I'm going to remove the database that I have, and I'll try recreating it. So Python from project import db create app, and then db create all app equals create app, and then I'll look at the database. Let's create it. Tables. Okay, so it's working now. I'm not sure why it didn't work the first time. So I'll do Flask run again, and I'll try signing up again. Should be .com. Okay, so name DB is not defined, so I forgot to import DB inside of my auth here. So from .import DB, pretty simple thing to fix. Let's try that again. Okay, so it redirected me to the login page, so I'm assuming that it worked. And the way I can try is by creating the same exact email. And if I get that error message, then I know that it's saved correctly. And I see email address already exists. Go to the login page. Okay, so finally got that working. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to work on the login endpoint. So this is for the authentication part to verify I am who I say I am. So this is going to be similar to sign up. So let me go ahead and add /login there. And I'll go ahead and copy the messages as well because it's going to be very similar. except this message is going to be a little bit different. But once I get to the part where I flash the message, I will modify this. But I already know I'm going to have a notification section up here, just like I have on the sign up page. So here in my login route, I'm going to do something similar. So I'm going to get the email and the password. No need for the name because you don't have the name on the login form. So email equals request form get email. The password is going to be request form get password. And then it also has a remember me checkbox here. So I'm going to get that as well. So I'll say remember. And this is going to be true if request form get remember returns anything, else false. So the reason why I'm doing this is because if the checkbox isn't checked, then the browser won't send anything over with the request, so it won't find remember. So basically what this is saying is if it finds remember, that means it's checked, so set it to true. And if it doesn't find it, then set it to false because it's not checked. So now I want to query for that user. So user query filter by. So this is going to be just like the query I have in my signup route. But this is a little different. So I want to make sure the user exists and if the user has the correct password. So I can do that at the same time with lazy evaluation. So if user, or I should say if not user. So if not user, then I'll do something down here with the redirect and the flash. And I also want to check the password. So check password hash is what I'll be using. Not check password hash. And this comes from WorkZerg security. So check password hash. And I'll put not in front of this. And basically I pass in the user password. So this is the password from the user model. So user.password from here. And then this is the password that they pass in the form. So by passing in both the hash password and the plain text password, WorkZerg can check to see if this password, when hashed, matches this password. So the reason why I have not here is because the first check, if not user, means that no user was found with that email address. So if no user was found with the email address, this will be true. The password wouldn't even get checked and it will just go into this section here. If the user is found, then it's going to go to the second check, which is the password. If the password is incorrect, it's going to go into this if block. If the password is correct, then this entire if statement evaluates to false and it just skips over what's inside. So what goes inside is basically the error message. So I'll say, please check your login details and try again. So that's going to be my message. And then I'm going to redirect to the login route. So redirect URL for auth login. So now I can go to login here and my message is simply going to be whatever I send there. So if I don't make it into that if block, that means that the user has authenticated correctly. So they supplied the correct email and password. So here's where I actually want to log them in. So from Flask-Login, I'm going to use from Flask-Login, I'm going to use the login user function and simply call that here. So login user, and I'll pass in the user object. So what this does is it creates the cookie, it creates the session, and that is what tells my app that this particular user is logged in. So one thing that I noticed that I did wrong here is I just put this in the wrong one. This needs to go here, but it's basically just cut and paste. So there, just like that. So it goes in the login post. And then I'm going to return them to their profile. So return URL for, let's see, main.profile. And of course, this goes inside of a redirect. So let's see if that works. So hopefully the server restarted. I'll try logging in and invalid syntax. I forgot something. Maybe it didn't restart correctly. Let me just make sure. Yeah. So I'll use my credentials, log in, and I get redirected to the profile page, which says welcome Anthony. So my name is actually Anthony in the database, but if I want to specify any other name, what I can do is I can go to the main route, and I'm going to import a couple of things from Flask-Login here. So from Flask-Login, import login required. So what login required does is it protects a view that is supposed to be for logged in users only. This is where the authorization part comes in. And then I'll use current user, which represents the current user. So this route is the one where I want to protect it. So you basically put the login required decorator in between the route decorator and the name of the function. And then inside of here, when you're using login required, you can use the current user object. So current user.name can be the name. And I'll just pass that directly. So I'll say name equals current user.name. So current user represents the object of the user. So it's going to have the same form as this. So you can access the ID, the email, the password, the name. So that's just what I'm doing here. I'm getting the name. So when I go to the templates, instead of having my name hard-coded, I can just say name here because I'm passing it to the template here, and it will display it. So instead of that, I'll add 2 more just so we can see the change. And we see welcome Anthony. So we know it's working there. So that should be it for the main one. The next thing I want to do is I want to work on the logout. So logout is very simple. I'm going to import logout user. And I'm going to also import login required. So I'll put the login required here because users who aren't logged in shouldn't be able to log out. And I'll just call logout user here, the function. So I'll restart my server because it's acting funny. So I'll try logging out, and then I'll try going back to the profile page. And when I do, it redirects me automatically to the login screen because I'm no longer logged in. So now I have my authorization set up and I have my authentication set up. And really the last thing I can do is I can just make sure that these links only appear for the correct users. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll go to my base template. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some if statements around the part that should be logged in. So let's say if current user dot is authenticated. So it's saying if the current user is truly, in fact, authenticated, then what I'll do is I'll display the profile. If they're not authenticated, then it won't display this at all. And then I'll do the same thing for the logout button. And then for the login and sign up, I want to do the opposite. So basically, if they're not authenticated, then I want to display those two. And then the home is always going to be displayed. So let's go ahead and try that. And we see now I'm not logged in, so I see login and sign up, just those 2 links. If I try going to profile directly, it redirects me to the login screen. So what I'll do is I'll log in with my information, welcome Anthony, and I see profile, I see home, and I see logout. So those links all work there. And the remember me one is basically, if they close the browser and come back, then their session will still be active. If I don't click that remember me checkbox, then Flask-Login won't remember. So let me make sure I have that in my login. I don't. So you just remember equals remember because I have the true or false here. So if it's true, it will remember the user. If it's false, then it won't remember the user. So let me go ahead and make sure that part still works because I made the change. And it does. So that's pretty much it for authentication and authorization in Flask using Flask-Login. Obviously, you can make this code as complicated as you want, but really it's not that difficult. I decided to use blueprints to kind of separate everything, but everything here looks good. So if you have any questions about anything I did in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below and I will answer it as soon as possible. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching and I will talk to you next time.